So having created all of our log files, we need to see how we can rotate these to reduce the amount of data we're storing within that var log structure. So of course we should be a little bit concerned about our log files, and we don't want our log files to fill up our system, nor do we want to have to manually go in and start archiving this information. So we can control this through logrotate, and by default logrotate runs once a day via cron. If I move through into the etc and cron.daily directory, so pwd will show us where we are, and if I go through and run a listing here, we can see one of the files that we've got is logrotate. These are marked as green, so these are executable scripts that run once a day. We can control what will be rotated via the /etc directory, and if I go through and just look at the logrotate.conf, we can see that we can pick up defaults here. So if we specify weekly, then we're going to rotate log files weekly, keeping 4 copies of them with the rotate. We can create new empty ones, and we could actually specify the permissions as well if we wanted with that. We can then go through and put on the date extension, and we've already seen that when we've been looking at those secure files. If I want to compress, we could then go through and use compression afterwards. We can see that we're including the logrotate.d directory, and then we've got some samples. So we're looking at things like the wtemp file here and the btemp file. And obviously I could just put my own file definitions within here, or I can put them within the logrotate.d. For my ease, I'm just going to go through and set this up myself. So if I go through and just quit out of this and go back and edit that file, as I'm just putting in something quite small, I'm just going to use then the logrotate.conf. If we just go down then to the bottom, we've got the idea of how it's set up by looking at the other, just putting a clear space to delimit myself from the previous entry. That space isn't really required, but it makes it easier to read. We can see we've got the brace brackets defining an opening and closing structure. So we can go through and put /var/log and then the name of the file that we want to use. So we called it Andrew. We can put in the brace block then to define the parameters that we're setting in. Again, we can go through and put missing OK, so we don't worry, we don't create errors if it's not there. We can also go through and do things like this not if empty, so if there's nothing in the log file, then we don't have to worry about rotating it. Remember, we can do it on both time and on size. So this is then just making sure that, especially if we're doing it on time, then we're not going to be worried about rotating it if it's no content. We can pick up the default of rotating weekly. We can pick up on the default of rotate 4, keeping 4 copies. So I'm not going to put those entries in. But if I go through and put, say, size 10, just putting that there, if we get to 10 bytes or more, so this is a ridiculous setting. Normally we'd be looking at things like at least a value in K, if not megabytes. And we could even go through and put things like compress if we want, so it's then compressed afterwards. So we specify the file name and then brace brackets that control the parameters. I can put a comma separated list of files before the brace brackets if it's more than one file that I need to control. But we can then go through and save those change. Now there is no service as such, I don't need to restart the service, but I do need to kick off logrotate. So if I go through and check currently in the var log directory structure, and let's say do Andrew star, so we can see we've just got my ordinary log file now. But if I now go through and run logrotate, and then it takes an argument of the configuration file, but this would also, remember, include anything within the subdirectory, the logrotate.d. But we read in the configuration file, this then specifies to read in from the subdirectory. Now when I go back and rerun my listing, we can see now that I've got my original log file, which will now be a clean and empty file, and then my rotated content. And we can see that we've got the date extension and it's been compressed. So hopefully this gives you an idea of rotating your log files. Certainly if you do add new log files, we should add entries to rotate them. Let's take a look now at the systemd mechanism for log files and looking at our journal CTL.